My name is Callie and I never asked for war. All I wanted was to live in peace with my dog, Biscuit, in the modest little house I inherited from my late grandmother. Tucked at the end of Pine Ridge Lane, my home was cozy, shaded by a stubborn oak tree that'd been there since the 1930s and smelled like old wood and lavender. Biscuit, a scruffy brown mutt with an overbite and the soul of a retired rodeo clown, was my world. We'd walk every morning before sunrise and again before dinner, like clockwork, and for 2 years life was quiet, predictable, safe. That was before she moved in. Her name was Cheryl, but everyone just called her Karen. She arrived in a beige Lexus with sunglasses so big they swallowed half her face, dragging behind her a massive HOA welcome wagon banner and an entourage of clipboard-carrying middle-aged mini-dictators. They were the type who wore matching visors on the weekends and thought grass height violations were crimes against humanity. The HOA had always existed technically, but it had been more ceremonial than functional. No one really enforced anything. My grandma never bothered with it and no one cared. But when Karen took over as president, an unopposed election held in the clubhouse basement on a Tuesday at 2 p.m., she brought the kind of energy that screams, "My nephew is a cop." The first notice came in a sky blue envelope, taped aggressively to my door. Subject: noncompliance with HOA membership participation. You are hereby invited to join the Pine Ridge Lane HOA. While not mandatory, non-participation may result in limited access to neighborhood amenities and community support services. I ignored it not because I wanted to be defiant, but because I knew what they really meant. Join us or be punished. I wasn't going to pay $89 a month to fund a volleyball net and a newsletter no one reads. Plus, Biscuit and I didn't use amenities. We didn't even like people. A week later, the trash can rule changed. Suddenly, my bins weren't allowed to be out past 10 a.m. on pickup days. Then came the lawn height policy. Then the mailbox alignment directive. Then the flower color recommendation, which, though voluntary, somehow led to Mrs. Cruz's petunias being mysteriously torn out overnight. I didn't say anything. I mowed my lawn just enough. I kept my mailbox slightly crooked out of spite, but I knew I was being watched. It was the note that came on a Friday afternoon that finally made me furious. Biscuit had been barking at a squirrel, and Karen decided it was grounds for a formal complaint. Your dog's behavior does not align with community expectations. Community expectations, the words made my skin crawl. I called the HOA number listed on the paper, which of course went straight to voicemail. My follow-up email got a reply 4 days later from someone named Trent, who CC'd 3 board members and suggested we all meet to talk it out over lemonade. I declined. I should have known it would get worse, but nothing prepared me for what happened 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday when Biscuit vanished. I'd left for work at 8:15 a.m. as usual. Biscuit was in the fenced backyard, sunbathing like he did every morning. When I got back at 4:30 p.m., he was gone. The gate was open. There was no note, no paw prints, no signs of struggle, just an eerie silence and the sag of the gate latch hanging open like a broken jaw. I ran through the neighborhood, yelling Biscuit's name, asking anyone I saw. Most people gave me blank stares. One guy, a teenager with headphones, said he'd seen a white SUV parked near my yard earlier. My heart dropped. Karen drove a white Lexus SUV. I pounded on her door, no answer. I called her name, nothing, but I knew someone was inside. I could hear movement. Still, I couldn't force my way in, and without evidence, I'd be the one in trouble. I called animal control, the police, even the local shelter. I posted in every neighborhood group I could find, put up flyers and canvassed the surrounding blocks. Biscuit had no collar on. He'd chewed through the last one and I hadn't replaced it yet, but he was chipped. If he ended up anywhere official, they'd scan him. That night I sat on my porch in the dark, arms wrapped around my knees. I hadn't cried yet. I felt too hollow, too stunned. And then I remembered. The cameras. My grandmother had a home security system installed after a break-in 10 years ago. I rarely checked it. Half the time it triggered from raccoons or the wind, but the cameras still worked. There was one pointed at the front yard. Another covered the backyard. I sprinted inside, pulled up the feed, and began scrubbing through the day's footage. At 12:07 p.m., a white Lexus SUV pulled up 2 houses down. At 12:10 p.m., Karen, dressed in a peach blouse and khakis, walked casually down the sidewalk. At 12:12 p.m., she walked through my side gate. No knock, no call, no permission. At 12:14 p.m., she emerged holding Biscuit, wrapped in a pink towel like some kind of trophy. She looked straight at the backyard camera before smirking and disappearing off-screen. I froze the image. My hands trembled as I paused the video, zoomed in and saw it again, that smirk. She didn't know about the cameras. Or maybe she didn't care. I backed up the footage and saved everything, multiple angles, timestamps, the license plate, the whole thing. I uploaded it to a cloud folder and backed it up to a hard drive, a flash drive in my phone. I wasn't just going to get my dog back. I was going to make Karen regret ever setting foot on my property. And this time I wouldn't fight alone. The next morning I didn't go to work. I called in sick, poured myself a mug of bitter black coffee and pulled out a notebook. My mind was on fire, flipping between heartbreak and white-hot fury, but I knew I couldn't storm over to Karen's and demand anything. That would only get me arrested. I needed to be smart, precise, strategic. Karen had taken my dog, my family, because I refused to bow down to her little suburban regime. She thought she could scare me into obedience, make an example out of me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I started with a list. 1, file police report with video evidence. 2, talk to neighbors, real ones, not HOA drones. 3, check local shelters again. 4, research HOA bylaws. 5, contact lawyer cousin Jessica. I bundled up and stepped outside. The air was sharp, early spring fighting off the last bite of winter. The neighborhood was oddly quiet, like everyone had ducked into their houses to avoid catching whatever storm was brewing. I didn't care. I went door to door. First was the Sullivans, 2 houses down, retired couple, nice enough. Mrs. Sullivan answered, peeking from behind the door with hesitant eyes. "Did you see anything unusual yesterday?" I asked, holding up a printed photo of Karen from the video still, Biscuit barely visible in her arms. Around noon. Her face stiffened. "I don't want any trouble," she said quietly. I tilted my head, so something did happen. She hesitated, then leaned forward. "I saw her walk out of your yard. I didn't know what she was doing, but I thought it was strange." She looked smug. "That word again. Would you be willing to say that in writing, or on camera?" Mrs. Sullivan stepped back like I'd asked her to punch a nun. "Oh no, not with Karen, she has ways." I forced a smile, "Thanks anyway." I got similar responses from 4 more houses. Everyone had seen something, but no one wanted to get involved, not after what happened to the Petersons. Apparently they'd complained about a surprise HOA fine last fall and suddenly had their garage door cited for non-standard paint finish. Then their water got shut off for plumbing inspections. The rumor was Karen had connections, real ones, with city permits, utility companies, even the zoning office. I didn't doubt it, but I wasn't the Petersons. After gathering a few more soft confirmations, I headed to the local precinct. The officer at the front desk barely glanced at the video I showed him. "You said she took your dog from your backyard," he asked, thumbing through the form. "Yes, on my property, without permission. I have it all on camera." He squinted. "Well, technically, if the dog was outside and not secured." "He was secured, the gate was latched. She entered without consent." He finally gave me a report number, but the way he spoke told me not to hold my breath. "We'll follow up if animal control logs him. Otherwise, it's a civil matter." Civil matter, my blood boiled. She stolen him. If he'd been a child, they'd have helicopters in the air. Back at home, I called Jessica, my cousin. She was a family law attorney, but sharp as hell and twice as mean when she needed to be. I explained the situation and sent her the footage. "You're telling me this woman, who runs your HOA, just casually walked into your backyard and took your dog?" she asked, her voice low with disbelief. "Exactly." "You're sitting on a goldmine of a lawsuit, but you need to be careful. People like this don't just play dirty, they live in the mud." I asked her if she'd be willing to represent me. She agreed without hesitation. "Send me all your HOA correspondence, every document, every email, everything." I spent the next hour digging through drawers, email threads, and junk mail piles. The more I collected, the more I noticed a pattern, dozens of notices, all thinly veiled threats, most citing policies that weren't actually listed in the official bylaws, and none of them were signed with full names, just the board. I highlighted every vague sentence, every line of "may be subject to," and failure to comply could result in nonsense. They operated like a mafia in yoga pants and boat shoes. By nightfall, I had a full file assembled. I uploaded it all to a secure shared drive with Jessica and made one more backup just in case. Then I turned to the real weapon, social media. I started a Facebook group called Justice for Biscuit Pine Ridge Watch and posted the video. Not just the theft, but clips of Karen at previous board meetings, barking about aesthetic standards and community image. I didn't name names directly, but anyone in the neighborhood knew exactly who she was. I expected 10, maybe 15 people to care. By midnight, it had over 200 members, neighbors, former residents, even a few people from nearby towns. Comments poured in. She fined me for a garden gnome. That lady made my sister repaint her shutters, twice. Biscuit's the friendliest dog on the block. This is sick. Some even sent their own videos and photos, Karen measuring lawn heights with a ruler, inspecting trash bins in the early morning, opening mailboxes. One video showed her yelling at a teenager for parking half an inch over the sidewalk. The pattern was clear. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was enforcing power. And suddenly, she was losing it. The next day, I got a cease and desist letter, delivered by hand, from Karen herself. She marched up to my door in her signature windbreaker, lipstick like red lacquer, and held out the envelope with a fake smile that could melt steel. "You're spreading defamatory material online," she said sweetly. "It would be in your best interest to take it down." I took the letter without a word. She didn't know I was already recording. The phone in my pocket captured every word. She turned to leave but paused. "Oh, and if you're still missing that mud of yours, maybe you should check the rules about pets left unattended. We do have standards, Callie." My fists clenched. I waited until she walked off, then opened the envelope. The legal notice was laughably generic, written in Comic Sans, no joke, with enough empty threats to wallpaper a room. Jessica confirmed it was toothless. But something else came with it. On the back of the last page, in rushed handwriting, was a note I knew Karen hadn't meant to include. "Drop the dog back at 212 Rosewood under cover of night. No cameras, no one sees us. This never happened." 212 Rosewood, that was Trish Dean's place, one of the newer residents. Quiet, divorced, worked night shifts at the hospital. Was she hiding Biscuit? I didn't wait. That night I parked 2 blocks away, dressed in black, and made my way to Rosewood Lane with my phone camera rolling. Around 2 a.m., a figure in a hoodie crept out of the backyard at 212. She carried something, someone bundled up. Biscuit. I didn't move, just filmed, watched as she set him down gently on the grass and whispered something. Biscuit stood frozen for a second, sniffing the air, then bolted. Straight toward me. I scooped him up in a half-sob, half-laugh, the camera still recording the figure hurrying back into the shadows. I had my dog back, but I wasn't finished. Karen had declared war. Now it was my turn. Biscuit clung to me like Velcro all the way home. His fur was matted in places, and he smelled like lavender floor cleaner, which told me everything I needed to know. Karen had kept him in her house, probably trying to hide the evidence with the same air freshener she used for everything else, including her personality. I cleaned him up, fed him, and let him curl beside me on the couch while I uploaded the newest footage, the grainy night video of a woman returning him to 212 Rosewood, to the Justice for Biscuit group. I blurred her face just in case. I wasn't trying to hurt a nurse pulling night shifts. I wanted the one calling the shots. The post blew up by morning. People were furious. It wasn't just about Biscuit anymore. It was about everything. About the fines, the threats, the petty vendettas dressed up as community regulations. And now people were ready to fight. Jessica called me first thing. "I don't usually say this, but I hope she sues you," she said cheerfully. "Because we have receipts. Every video, every message, every pattern of abuse of power. The minute this hits court, she's going down in flames." I asked her if we could go public. Her voice sharpened. "Absolutely. You've got enough for a restraining order and a civil suit, and if we find out she's misused HOA funds, that's criminal." That's when I started digging deeper, not just into Karen, but into the HOA itself. I found minutes from old meetings buried in an online archive. They were sparse, badly formatted, and suspiciously missing entries for any controversial decisions. But one thing stood out. 2 years ago, the HOA budget listed nearly $20,000 for beautification projects. No follow-up reports, no vendor receipts, no completed work that anyone could recall. It vanished into the void. Karen's void. I posted the budget discrepancy in the group and asked if anyone had copies of old notices, fines, or fees. Within a day, I had over 40 screenshots and PDFs from residents. Most of them showed arbitrary charges: $50 for excessive birdseed, $75 for improper hose storage, $100 for vehicle eyesore, whatever that meant. It was theft not just of Biscuit but of people's money and power. I organized a meeting, not through the HOA but in the park by the community center. No agenda, no clipboards, just neighbors. People came, a lot of them. Some in scrubs, some in lawn chairs, some pushing strollers. And for the first time, they started talking to each other instead of hiding behind hedges and garage doors. Mrs. Sullivan spoke first. "I've lived here 25 years, she said, her voice trembling, and I've never been afraid to go into my own garden until this year." Then came Javier, a mechanic who'd received 6 separate fines for oil residue on the driveway despite cleaning it weekly. Then Ray, who lost his job and was charged a $250 non-landscaping maintenance fee during the time he was unemployed. Everyone had a story. And every story pointed to the same person. Karen didn't show up, of course, but her little spies did. Karen's second-in-command, Rhonda, the one with the stacked bob haircut and a Bluetooth headset fused to her ear, hovered near the playground like a narc at a music festival, pretending to chat on her phone while snapping photos. I waved at her. She scurried away. That night, a new notice appeared on my door. Community alert, unauthorized gathering in violation of HOA guidelines. Residents may face penalties for unapproved meetings. This time I laughed. I took the notice, lit a candle, and ceremoniously burned it on the porch. Biscuit watched, tail thumping like a drumbeat. The next step was a formal challenge. Jessica helped me draft a petition to audit the HOA's finances and call a vote of no confidence in the current board leadership. It wasn't easy. Karen had built a web of rules so dense it practically had its own gravity, but the bylaws included a loophole. If 30% of the homeowners signed a verified petition, we could trigger a special election. I walked door to door with Biscuit. His face was better advertising than any flyer. Even people who'd been neutral before signed the petition after hearing what had happened. It wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about dignity, about not being scared in your own neighborhood. We hit 30% in 3 days. Karen tried to fight it. We got an email again from Trent, claiming the signatures were not verified, and a special election would undermine the stability of community operations. But Jessica was ready. She drafted a cease and desist for harassment, prepared the civil suit paperwork, and included an itemized list of every irregular fine and unlawful act of HOA overreach. And then I got the calls. Channel 6 News. "Hi, is this Callie? We saw the Facebook group and wanted to do a segment on your story. What's happening with your dog and your neighborhood?" I almost dropped the phone. They came out 2 days later. Biscuit wore a bow tie. I wore a shirt that said, "Not today, Karen." The interview aired that night, our footage, the meeting in the park, even a split screen of Biscuit being taken versus him returning to me, tail wagging in triumph. The reporter stood in front of the HOA office and called it the most bizarre suburban power struggle since someone tried to ban inflatable flamingos in Riverview. The next morning, my inbox exploded. Hundreds of messages. People across the country shared stories about abusive HOAs, power-mad board members, stolen items, threats, illegal fines. I wasn't alone. And neither was Biscuit. That afternoon, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside it said, "She has cameras too, but she forgot we do as well. Check your email." There was no signature, but the handwriting looked familiar. The same loopy loops I saw on envelopes delivered by Karen, only this one was shakier, nervous, scared. I rushed to my inbox, a new message from a burner address. It had a single attachment, security footage. From inside the HOA office. Karen pacing, screaming at Rhonda, papers flying. "We can't let them win, do you understand? If they get control, they'll find everything. The invoices, the shell company, the money." The clip cut off. My hands were shaking. I looked at Biscuit. "Girl," I whispered, "we just found the smoking gun." Karen had just made one mistake too many. And the fire she tried to start was about to burn her entire little kingdom to the ground. The morning after I received the anonymous footage, I sat in my kitchen with Biscuit snoozing by my feet, watching that clip over and over. Every time Karen said shell company, I got a little more lightheaded. Jessica didn't even let me finish explaining before she cut me off. "This is criminal. She's embezzling HOA funds through a dummy vendor. You realize what this means." "Tell me we can nail her to the wall." "We're not just going to nail her," she said. "We're going to hang her entire operation out to dry publicly, legally, and loudly." Within hours, Jessica had the footage submitted to the district attorney's office. The moment they opened a formal investigation, everything changed. First, subpoenas went out. The HOA's financials, Karen's personal banking records, the company she'd been funneling funds into, it all became subject to scrutiny. And because I had already filed a civil suit and gone public with the dog theft, the DA had more than enough reason to dig deep. Then came the knock on my doors. Two detectives, both polite, both serious. They'd seen the footage. They wanted to know everything, from Biscuit's disappearance to the community fines to the fake invoices people had started sending me from their own mailboxes. Some of the charges Karen issued came with company names that didn't even exist in the state registry. One of the companies used for sidewalk repair was listed to an address in Arizona. That address, a self-storage unit. I handed them a flash drive with all the footage, screenshots, and files Jessica and I had gathered. They thanked me, then handed me a card. If she contacts you again, directly or indirectly, let us know. I asked them if this meant she'd be arrested. The older one looked thoughtful, eventually. That night, Karen's house went dark. Not just lights out, curtains drawn, car gone, no HOA flyers, no Rhonda lurking with a clipboard. It was as if she vanished into thin air. But the HOA still clung to life like a cockroach under a boot. Emails continued. Trent, now clearly just Karen's puppet, insisted the petition was invalid, the special election was canceled, and all HOA communication must be routed through official channels only. So I went to war in a new way. We printed flyers, dozens of us. We canvassed every mailbox, every porch, every community bulletin board in Pine Ridge and the neighborhoods around it. The flyers showed Biscuit, the budget discrepancies, the threats, and the now infamous quote from Karen's office camera, "They'll find everything." Under it in bolds, "This is your neighborhood, take it back." We listed the date for the community-led election. No HOA permission, no board oversight, just residents. It was time to see if the neighborhood really cared. On the day of the vote, people came in droves. They showed up in old folding chairs and lawn furniture. Kids held signs that said, "Let Biscuit bark." Someone even brought a karaoke machine and started singing protest songs. It felt less like a meeting and more like a block party that doubled as a revolution. We collected votes, physical ballots, signatures, addresses. Jessica made sure it was all legally airtight. We needed a majority. We got 76%. That night, I watched Biscuit snore on the couch while the neighborhood officially voted Karen and her cronies out. The relief in the air was palpable, like someone had opened all the windows in a dusty, oppressive house. But the saga wasn't over. 2 days later, the bombshell dropped. Karen was arrested at a hotel on the outskirts of the city, booked on charges of fraud, theft, trespassing, and conspiracy to defraud residents through the misuse of HOA funds. The local news ran her mugshot in the evening broadcast. The face that had once scolded people for mismatched shutters now stared hollow-eyed into the camera, stripped of her perfect curls and peach lip gloss. The fallout was nuclear. The DA's office raided the HOA's storage locker and found stacks of fake invoices, uncashed checks, and a laptop containing a spreadsheet that logged every resident and a compliance score Karen had made up. People were ranked based on obedience. Those who questioned her were marked probationary. Those who ignored her, enemies of order. She created a caste system. A caste system with fines, threats, surveillance, and stolen pets. In the aftermath, the HOA as we knew it was dissolved. Jessica helped us form a new board, transparent, limited in power, and community-led. Everything required majority votes. No secret meetings, no personal vendettas, no Karen. Rhonda tried to salvage her reputation by claiming she was just following orders, but footage surfaced of her yelling at a disabled veteran about his porch flag being too bright. That video did its own damage. She resigned for personal reasons. Trent disappeared. No one really noticed or cared. But that wasn't the end of it. One morning a few weeks after Karen's arrest, a woman knocked on my door, mid-40s, tired eyes, holding a small box. "I'm Trish," she said, "from Rosewood." I invited her in, and she sat stiffly at the table, hands clutching the box like it weighed 100 pounds. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know what she was doing at first." She said Biscuit had been abandoned and she was just watching him. She promised she was returning him to a rescue, but then she started asking me to lie. Trish opened the box. Inside were printed emails, notes, and a small collar. Biscuit, the one he'd chewed through. Karen had kept it. "She used to brag," Trish whispered. About power, about making people bend. I was scared of her too, but I'm done being scared. I thanked her. Biscuit nuzzled her leg. She smiled. When she left, I felt something shift. We hadn't just removed Karen. We'd replaced fear with fire. The neighborhood was healing. People waved now. Kids rode bikes without being scolded. Someone painted a mural on the side of the community center, Biscuit's face surrounded by wildflowers. A reminder that sometimes justice comes on four legs and a trail of broken rules. And the war wasn't quite over. Because there was still one part left. And it was going to make Karen's final chapter the most humiliating one yet. The sun was rising the morning I got the final letter. Not from Karen, she wasn't writing from jail, at least not to me, but from the county clerk's office. The state versus Karen H. Norwood. Formal charges filed. Criminal theft, Class C felony. Fraudulent misuse of funds. Unlawful surveillance. Trespassing. Animal cruelty, misconduct classification. Animal cruelty, that one hit the hardest, because I knew Biscuit. I knew he was gentle and goofy and easily spooked by raised voices. And I knew Karen wasn't gentle, not even close. The court date was set for a month later. Jessica would attend as my legal rep, but I was also named as a primary witness, and I wasn't going to miss that for anything. Biscuit wasn't either. Yes, I brought my dog to court. I had to fight for that, get a special approval, argue that he was central to the incident in question. The judge allowed it under the condition Biscuit remained quiet. He didn't make a peep. Karen, on the other hand, did. She walked into that courtroom with her hair limp and flat, her face bare of the usual ironclad makeup. No pearls, no heels, just stay-tissued beige and a flicker of rage she could no longer weaponize. Her lawyer tried to paint her as misunderstood, overworked, emotionally overwhelmed by the ungratefulness of residents who didn't respect order. When they played the video of her smirking directly into my backyard camera as she picked up Biscuit like a handbag, the jury flinched. When they showed the footage from inside her office, the "they'll find everything" rant, she closed her eyes. When Trish took the stand and told the court how Karen manipulated her, lied about Biscuit, and threatened her job at the hospital with a letter to the board, Karen started crying. Real tears or not, no one cared. But the knockout blow came from a source no one expected. The city controller. Turns out when Jessica and I shared our evidence with the DA, it triggered a much wider audit, one that uncovered a years-long pattern of Karen applying for community development grants and filtering them into her fake vendor accounts. She used them to fund cosmetic projects that never happened, then laundered the money into her own personal bank account. We're talking $87,000, gone, misused, traced right to her. The court fell silent when the numbers were read. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Karen got 7 years, no parole before 4, fines, probation, banned from ever serving on a board again. She tried to speak at sentencing, begged the judge for leniency. Cited stress, sexism, neighborhood hostility. The judge looked unimpressed. You didn't lose control, you built control, and you used it to harm others for personal gain. That's not stress, that's predation. Karen was escorted out in cuffs. It should have felt like the end, but it was not really. Because justice isn't just about punishing someone. It's about what comes after. The neighborhood took on a new life. We officially voted in a new HOA model, one focused on accessibility, transparency, and actual community care. Jessica helped us write a new charter. No more arbitrary fines, no more closed-door decisions. Everything voted on, everything published. We created committees, not power positions. There was a community garden crew, a pet watch team, even a kids' bike patrol that handed out stickers for helmets. We started hosting monthly porch nights where neighbors swapped food and stories instead of complaints. One afternoon, I caught Mr. Ray, the same guy who'd been fined for oil stains, building a bench at the park with his teenage son. They carved Biscuit's name into the side. That bench is still there, with a plaque that reads, "For Biscuit, who reminded us what loyalty really looks like." And as for me, I started working remotely full-time, giving me more hours with Biscuit. He never left my side after that. I took him to schools, shelters, even senior homes, where he became a bit of a local hero. People called him the dog who took down the HOA. But I know the truths. It wasn't just Biscuit. It was every neighbor who spoke up. Every parent who said, enough. Every old woman who ripped up a bogus fine and taped a flower to her mailbox instead. It was the we that scared Karen most. Because once we stood together, her power didn't mean anything. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Tyrants can only rule the quiet, the passive, the isolated. But when one dog goes missing, when one woman says, not today, that silence breaks. That unity builds. Injustice shows up, sometimes covered in dog hair, sometimes armed with nothing but truth and a camera. But it shows up. It always does.